Edward Goldsmith, a green traditionalist. Edward Goldsmith is what most would describe as a green traditionalist. He therefore positioned himself beyond the modernity's ideologies and presents a way back to balance both ecologically and socially. Tao, Arta, Mat, Sedek, the right relationship to the cosmos and nature. Goldsmith shows how different traditions has had a vision of how to live in a balance and in accordance with nature and the cosmos, and how they've even have given it a name. This is an important point, because many, both occultists, postmodernists, and others, are driven by what has been called a titanic attitude towards nature and the cosmos, where it is seen as something which exists simply in order to be subjugated. The historical traditions did not view it like that, but they realized that there was a way when it comes to the relationship to the cosmos, and that there were dire consequences when they ignored this path. Mircea Eliade and other great students of religion have shown how most of the rituals performed by traditional peoples served above all to maintain the cosmic order. In many societies, in fact, a word existed for the path that had to be taken in order to do so. The Tao of the ancient Chinese, the Irta of the Vedic Indians, the Asha of the Avestas, the Maat of the ancient Egyptians, and as Father Murray and Margaret Barker made clear in their writing, the Sedek of the ancient Hebrews. By following this path, one maintained the harmony between heaven and earth, the original meaning of shalom, cosmic order in fact. This was also the path of justice, and it was by following it that one observed at the same time the moral law, the divine law, and the cosmic law. There was seen to be no distinction between the law governing society, the nomos of the Greeks, that which governed the natural world itself, usually referred to by the Greeks as dik, and that which governed the all-embracing world of the gods, usually referred to as themis. What a contrast with modern man's view of law! It is worth noting that today our law serves above all to protect private property, and one could destroy the living world and make our very species extinct without violating a single one of the laws that we enacted. What an indictment of the world view that our law so faithfully reflects. Socio-political archaism. Goldsmith reconnects also the traditional societies that still exist in the world, mostly tribal people, and points to how their social forms are more suited for human nature and needs than what the modern society is. Economics embedded markets. Goldsmith reminds us, for example, of Polania, which he describes how traditional societies has subordinated their economy under social and cultural values. In tribal societies, it is only when dealing with complete strangers that the laws of the market are allowed to operate free of social constraints, and exclusively market transactions are allowed to occur. For Bohannon, quote, "A market is a transaction which in itself calls upon no long-term personal relationship, and which is therefore to be exploited to as great degree as possible. In fact, the presence of a previous relationship makes a good market impossible. People do not like to sell to kinsmen, since it is bad form to demand as a high price from a kinsman as one might from a stranger. Market behavior and kinship behavior are incompatible in a single relationship, and the individual must give way to one or the other." End quote. This is very much in keeping with the Old Testament precept that, quote, "Unto a stranger thou mayest lend upon usury, but unto thy brother thou shalt not lend upon usury." End quote. Salines shows that it is possible to distinguish between the economic relations within different sectors such as the house, the lineage, the village, the tribe, and those outside the tribe. As we proceed from the former to the latter, so reciprocity and solidarity are slowly replaced by haggling and profit-making, and so do economic relations become increasingly commercial. That is why the development of the market system within a society could only occur once solidarity and reciprocity within the inner social groupings had waned and the essential difference between social relations within and without these groupings had become sufficiently blurred. In other words, before economic wealth could become man's principal preoccupation, he had first to be deprived of his social wealth. Though all societies have possessed an economy of some sort, no economy previous to our time, as Karl Polanyi notes, quote, "has ever existed that even in principle was controlled by markets." End quote. This is not surprising, since only by resisting the power of market forces could, quote, "the integrity of our social and ecological systems be maintained for so long." End quote. Once markets became more than incidental to economic life, the societies in which they operated, together with the ecosystems in which the society existed, were condemned to rapid disintegration. True conservatism. When he points out that today's conservatives usually doesn't protect the community, the family, or the nation, but only economic interests, he makes himself again very readable, and reminds at least me of the old populist Lash. Right when we deal about culture and norms, and left when we deal about the economy. On the other hand, Mr. Reagan and Mrs. Thatcher and their respective administrations see themselves, and are generally seen by others, as patriots and conservatives. They claim to stand for tradition, for religion, for the family, and for traditional moral values. But do they really? The main feature of their very similar policies is industrialization at any cost. Industrialization means systematically transforming traditional society into modern society, replacing traditional villages with huge cities and housing estates, artisanal workshops with vast factories, village schools with the factory-like compounds. It means in fact promoting change away from traditional society towards a brave new world of skyscrapers, factories, computers, battery farms, etc. How can such a policy be regarded as conservative? How can a policy that by its very nature must lead to the systematic destruction of our cultural heritage, the annihilation of our forests, our hedgerows, the erosion of our soil, the extermination of our wildlife, the contamination of our rivers and of our groundwater, the transformation of a proud and self-reliant people into a vast anonymous mass of increasingly alienated and unemployed people, who are even more dependent for their very sustenance on the functioning of a massive centralized bureaucracy, be regarded even by the remotest stretch of the imagination as conservative? Politics. Ethnocracy as the ideal. Even Goldsmith's thoughts on ethnocracy, or ethnocracy, in opposition to the modern state is rewarding, especially in relation to the post-colonial African states with their artificial boundaries, but in increasing extent also for Europe. In Europe, people are now slowly beginning to see the light. In Belgium, for instance, A new project is being studied to divide the country into 4 regions: one Walloon, one Flemish, one German, and one composed of the ethnically mixed population of Brussels. What is more, much of the power would be delegated to sub-regions made up of associated communes. The Council of Europe, too, is beginning to show greater interest in the concept of federalism. Recently, a meeting was held under its auspices to study the natural regions that cut across present state boundaries. A typical one is the Regio Basiliensis, which includes Alsace, Baden, and the Swiss canton of Basel. The inhabitants of these areas are ethnically related, being descended from the Germanic tribe of the Alemanni, and speak a similar German dialect. They have recently been made aware of their common identity by the threat to their biological survival posed by the nuclear industry, that proposes to put up no fewer than 16 nuclear power stations in their midst, 6 in the French section of this region, 5 in the Swiss, and 5 in the German. A nation is indeed made by its enemies rather than by its friends. Another such region, at present being studied by the Institut Universitaire des Études Européennes in Genève, is the Lemano-Alpine region, made up of much of French-speaking Switzerland, the Franche-Comté Savoy, the Val d'Aosta, and parts of the French departments of the Isère and of the Ain. Another is the Trieste region, made up of the Friuli, Carinthia, and Slovenia. In all 15 such regions have been identified, and it is hoped that they will slowly be allowed to become effective units for certain social and economic purposes at least. It is only by encouraging such developments and by generally decentralizing power from the governments running the artificial countries of Europe to those of the real nations that compose them that stability and peace can be assured. In the meantime, it is very irresponsible to set up political structures in Africa and elsewhere in what was once our colonial empire that do not reflect social realities and whose eventual dismemberment into their natural regions is inevitable, and what is more, at the cost of a great deal of unnecessary human misery. In short, Goldsmith is very rewarding for everyone who has started to think about the modern project and what might come after it.